So what exactly is globalization? Scholars define globalization differently. In our edited book in 2004, Marcelo Serres Orozco and myself, we define globalization as the increasing deterritorialization of nation states and cultural formations, emphasizing really this increasing lack of relevance of the border between nation states and between cultural forms and ways of living. And if we look at the way that people used to live, like our ancestors used to live 100 years ago or 200 years ago, from this form of the original village where people, they were born, then they grew up, they go to school, they get married, they work, they have children, they die, they get buried, all within a certain vicinity of really what we call the original village. But today, our way of living is very different. Some people argue that we're all living together in a global village. And in some ways, whether we want it or not, globalization is here and is here to stay. And there are four main pillars of globalization. The first one is this increasing deterritorialization of nation states. If we look at, for example, the EU, which grew from only 6 nations about 20 years ago to over 24 today. And another important pillar of globalization is the emergence of global markets. We talked about before in the beginning of the class how every day by the time we get up in the morning till we go to sleep at night, far over $1 trillion, which is 120 miles high of $100 bills, would have crossed national borders. And the third pillar is really new information and communication technologies. If we look at the speed of development of computers, of number of people on Facebook, of the lack of cost, the decreasing cost of telephone calls, like via Skype nowadays, we see plenty of evidence for this. And finally, an important pillar is unprecedented population movements and worldwide migration. And John Coathworth argues that if we look at the historical perspective of globalization, compared to the previous wave, particularly between 1880 and 1930, where really this export-led growth in Europe, in this era called the Belle Epoque, and comparing to that period, this new phase or new era of globalization beginning from 1985 is still kind of incipient and weak in terms of the volume, in terms of the percentage of the influence of global integration. And how is globalization changing the worlds of young people around the globe today? I think it's not hard to find evidence anywhere, pretty much anywhere you go around the world nowadays. Really, this increasingly transnational lives young people are living, enabled by globalization in terms of travel capacity, in terms of communication, in terms of the generation of desire and fantasies. And there's also a new paradigm for education. And scholars argue that right now, in an era of globalization, education is more important than ever. And computer and the digital intelligence is also another form of competence that youth around the globe are developing in this era. And globalization is also changing the face of children and youth in the U.S., mainly through large-scale immigration. And if we look at immigration in the scale of the whole world, we see that comparing to some of the other developed countries like Australia, Canada, like Sweden even, or some of the Northern European countries, the rate of migration actually in the U.S. is not as high as some of these other countries. So around the globe today, a conservative estimate is that we have about 175 million international immigrants and refugees. And it's also very important to note that large-scale immigration around the globe nowadays really happen within national borders in a lot of countries. So these kind of internal migration where people move from the countryside to the city looking for a better life. And for example, in China alone, there are over 100 million rural to urban migration. And some scholars argue that number may be closing to 130 to 150 million. So really comparable to all the international immigrants across different national borders. And if we look at immigration to the U.S., we see mainly 3 different stages. And the first stage is really the classic era immigration. A lot of these beliefs and folk beliefs about immigration, the American dream, really came from this era where a lot of the European immigrants came to this country between 1880 and 1930. And then we have a period of hiatus from 1930 to 1970, really caused by a variety of factors like the Great Depression, the Cold War. A lot of the European countries became recipient countries rather than sending countries of immigrants. And then in 1965, Congress passed the Hart-Celler Act, which really ushered in a new era of immigration happen? That started in 1970. Scholars argue that there are really different pull and push factors that causes migration, large-scale migration. And in terms of the pull factor, it's mainly by the booming economy in the developed world. For example, the wage differentiation, and also this built-in need of a society to constantly have people who are willing to work for low wages because of status inflation. Basically, people at the bottom, they always try, to get higher salary, which triggers people above them to have higher salary. So then you constantly need to replenish the lowest level of the labor market. And then there are also pushed factor, for example, by the depressed economies in the sending countries, and also by, for example, globalization. If Walmart is going to build a factory in rural Vietnam, then that kind of push those people out of the farms, out of their way of living, so they become a mobile population who could be candidates for immigration. And really, if we look at the 2 sectors of the economy that immigrants to the U.S. are feeling today, we see really 2 predominant groups. We see like an hourglass shape economy. We see the technology at the top and the service at the bottom. And immigrants also come sometimes seeking a political asylum and or reuniting with their families. The different types of mobile populations include immigrants, include refugees, asylum seekers, and also sojourners, people who come to work and then they want to go back home after a selected period of time. And then within immigrants, we have undocumented. This is a chart really showing immigration to the U.S. From 1850 to 2000. And in this chart, we see the green line representing the number of foreign-born population immigrants. And the blue line, we see the percentage of foreign-born population as in the whole population. And we see that really in terms of percentage, in the classic era, really that reached about 14% at the peak. And today we're still about 11 to 12%. This chart shows the origin of the immigrants, and we see from 1960 to 2000, there's dramatic increase of Latino and Asian population and dramatic decrease in immigrants from Europe. So how is this influencing our own work? And if we look at the number, 1 out of every 5 children today are children of immigrants. And that number is projected to be 1 out of 3 in 2040. There's also tremendous diversity within the immigrant population. So in some ways, it doesn't matter who you work with. You work with families, you work with children, you work with young people, and irrespective of the population that you're going to work with, it's unavoidable that you will be working with immigrants, immigrant families, immigrant children, and youth. So I think it's very important for us to think about the implication of the new realities in terms of how that impact our work. And finally, in the last page, there are just some videos related to culture and child rearing, human development, and I hope that you'll have a chance to review some of these. Thank you all, and I look forward to seeing all of you next.